Hey, welcome back to Have You Heard, the official podcast of Nichols College Athletics. We're taping this on Monday, August 3rd, with longtime Commonwealth Coast Conference Commissioner Gregg Kaye. We asked Gregg about a myriad of topics, including the NCAA's postponement of collegiate competition and fall sports until January, how that decision was reached, the growth of the CCC since he took over as commissioner, and his favorite Nichols memories. Hope you enjoy. We're pleased to be joined by Commonwealth Coast Conference Commissioner Gregg Kaye. Gregg, how's everything going today?
Pete, things are great. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of the podcast. You do such a great job, and it's an honor to be with you.
I appreciate you joining us today, honestly. And Gregg, I ignored this from the introduction here, but longtime New York Yankees fan, do you see us having an end to this season with everything going on with these cases?
Yeah, it's going to end, but I don't know if it's going to end in the way that we would all like to see it end. Every day there's a new challenge, there's a new variable. Much different world than we're in. So I know they're doing everything that they can, but it almost seems like it's a ticking time bomb. So I'm as a baseball fan, I'm grateful for every day that I can put on the baseball package and bounce around from game to game. And I just hope we can continue doing that through the rest of the summer.
Well, there's one thing we're sure of. Whether the season ends tomorrow, next week, or at Game 7 of the World Series, the Mets season will end the same way every year as it always does, and that's with sadness. So we have that one thing locked in during this corona period. Gregg, let's start out here. The announcement came out about 2 weeks ago now that the CCC was postponing fall competition and really all competition until January 1st of 2021. When did things seem to turn from we're going to play to we really may not be able to make this happen?
Yeah, that's really a good question, and probably something that gets lost in the translation when people see announcements and final decisions. I would say, and it all starts to run together after a while, but I would say probably about a month ago, we really had good conversations. We had good thoughts that we would be able to do this. We talked about a lot of protocols. We talked about what would need to happen in order to allow us to play and keep playing. Several weeks ago, there was an NCAA webinar, and there's quite a few of those that have gone on since last spring. And the NCAA chief medical officer was going through some different things, talking about what would need to happen in the event that there was a positive test or there was an outbreak. And when you start hearing all the things about who would have to quarantine, how long they would have to quarantine, that's when I think a lot of folks started thinking, boy, this is going to be a challenge. And I think as those conversations went on, and we started seeing some of the other announcements from others in New England and others around the country, that's where we really started thinking this is going to be a challenge. So really a couple weeks ago, I would say, probably about a week and a half before the announcement, that's when we really started looking in the direction that we didn't want to go. And it really seemed as if it was an inevitable conclusion for us to suspend everything.
Gregg, you brought up a great point there about the other conferences, and the Ivy Leagues was one of the first ones to make the announcement, and then you've had some Division IIIs preceding the CCC's announcement. How closely did you follow those, and was there a sense of we need to stay with everyone else here, or was there ever a thought of, hey, we're going to stand on our own here, we're going to be the first ones to make the announcement we are going to play?
Yeah, that's really a great question, and really a combination of things. I'm not going to say that just because one or several conferences made a decision that really impacted what we were going to do. I think as our athletic directors talked it through and as our president started evaluating recommendations that came from the ADs and different considerations that they brought into account, there really was a sense that we've got to do what is the right thing for our institutions and for our student athletes. The goal from the beginning was really to make sure that whatever we do, we're doing it as safely as we can. once the conversation gets going and you start seeing what other conferences are doing, it kind of gives you a sense of some of the other things that people are looking into. As an example, if you look at a conference where everybody is based within the same state, it's not as big of a challenge as far as travel restrictions, possible quarantines, things of that nature. So whenever you have multiple states, and really for the purposes of these conversations, the city of Boston is almost like its own entity. So you've got several different entities that have a lot of different things that are in play. So really, on a daily basis, once the dominoes started falling with the Ivy League and then the D3s kind of picked it up, it really was a daily process of keeping our athletic directors and our presidents aware of what was going on. And within a week or two after the Ivy League decision, it seemed like we were updating each other several times a day on what was happening. And there still, were folks that wanted us to do everything we could to play if it was possible. But I think when you start seeing all those dominoes fall, it really gives you reason to step back and say, well, why are we different than some of these leagues might be? Why are they different than us? The last few that ended up pulling the plug, most of those institutions were in the Midwest, in the central part of the country, and things shifted. That's when some of those dominoes really started to fall. So while you're not happy about it, it's always good to see that your thought process is the same one that others are taking into account. And certainly, I don't think any of us who were involved are happy with where we are, but we feel like ultimately we were able to make the right decision for us. And as it turns out, that decision right now seems to be along the lines of what others have decided they're going to do.
Well, that's some great insight for the listeners, Gregg. And I wanted to ask you about the meetings that went on during the summertime. What can you tell us as far as the presidents of the universities, the athletic directors, the athletic trainers were meeting for hours and hours a day with just all sorts of topics there? Can you give us some insights as far as maybe some of the things that were on the table, some things that were discussed that maybe we would never have thought of?
Absolutely. The conversation with both groups really goes back to March, when we postponed the spring season. That decision was actually announced on March 13th. We started conversations maybe about 3 or 4 days before that, and really it was conversation at that time of, okay, what is everybody doing with spring break trips? Are you going to let people travel? Things of that nature. The conversation really changed on around the 12th or the 13th when the NCAA decided that they were going to no longer conduct any spring championships. That's when it really, started taking, a turn for the worse. And at that point, the AD conversation was really, okay, what are you all doing? What are you all doing with your teams when they come back? Are you going to keep practicing? Are you going to try and shut it down and just focus on some other things? So really, from that point on, it was really a case of sharing ideas, sharing different ways of handling different challenges. About a week or so after that decision was made, then really the focus changed to, okay, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with, kids that have already played a certain number of games? What's going to happen with people, who may want to come back or may not be in a position to come back? How are they going to be impacted by this? And that's when really the flavor of our conversation turned into, okay, here's all the different legislative issues that we're dealing with. Normally if you play a certain once you play a game, you've already used a season of eligibility as a student athlete. So there was a lot of question as to whether or not somebody's season would go by the wayside simply because they played one game or maybe had a spring break trip where they played 3 or 4 games. Um, we finally started getting some answers from the NCAA. And the thing that I want to point out to folks that may not really be aware of how it works is when you hear things as far as what the NCAA is going to do. The NCAA, the national office, it's a lot different than what you're gonna encounter when you're talking about entities like the NFL or the NBA. The NCAA is essentially the membership. So you have different committees within that structure. There's a management council that is comprised of athletic administrators, um, faculty athletic representatives, conference commissioners, people of that type. The management council, what they do is they make recommendations to the Division III President's Council, which is a group of about 28 Division III presidents. And then above that, there's also a Division III Administrative Council that's empowered to act when the President's Council is not brought together. And then at the highest level of the structure, is the Board of Governors, and that has representation from the 3 different divisions. So you've got to wait for really all of those entities to have a chance to chime in, have conversation, send recommendations up the chain, back down the chain. What really makes it a challenge, and it's one of the things that has always been a pet peeve of mine, is that folks will go home and they'll put on Sports Center or they'll pull up their favorite newspaper online and they'll see things about what the NCAA is doing. Well, 99 times out of 100, what the media is reporting on is what's happening in Division One. Division One, Two, and Three, we all have our own governance structures. We all have different rules. We all have different things that we're allowed to do, and we all have different processes. So sometimes what happens in one division may impact the others, but other times it may not. So navigating that and making sure that folks aren't getting too caught up in the things that they're reading that quite frankly may not apply to our division. So even though we have a lot of folks who've been involved in college athletics their entire professional careers, we all at different times wind up being guilty of hearing what the NCAA is doing, when in fact that may not be anything that really has anything to do with us. So really, from March until the present time, our AD groups, we've been meeting weekly. As things have heated up, and as we've had different charges from the presidents, things that they want us to look at, or things that they're interested in learning more about, sometimes we would be meeting as many as 2 or 3 times a week for anywhere from an hour to 2 hours to try to work through different things. The president's group started out planning to meet monthly, and that turned into meeting almost weekly at different points, and that's a little bit of a challenge because those folks, their main concerns right now are their institutions. So they've got to worry about what are we doing on our campus, and then somehow they've got to be able to take the institutional hat and take it off and put the conference hat on. So in between all those meetings, as you can imagine, a lot of emails, a lot of texts, a lot of Zooms with maybe a small subset of people just talking through things. So I think the thing that folks probably you don't realize until you're a part of it is literally how ongoing these conversations are. Even if you're only meeting once a week, there's still constant communication among the athletic directors group or with me and the leadership in our president's group. Anytime I would come across an announcement from another conference, we're sharing that, and it inevitably would start more conversation. Every time you learn that, hey, these conferences are trying to get a waiver that would allow certain things to happen that previously you couldn't do. So making sure that folks know what's in the pipeline, uh, what they're going to be seeing, and just really giving everybody as much information as they can to have good conversations and have fruitful discussions. That's really my role, is not to say, here's what we're going to do, but to give people all the information and all the different options that might be on the table so that the best decisions can be made by the group.
Sure, and you mentioned earlier about the ESPN and the local newspapers online that people may be reading about things with the NCAA. And let's just be honest, it doesn't always get a good reputation. But I think one of the things that the NCAA did this year, in my opinion, which I can't imagine was a very difficult discussion, was to give the fifth year of eligibility to those spring student athletes. Now, it does pose challenges, especially at Division One, where you have maybe that person's scholarship was going to an incoming freshman, or maybe they were splitting it in half. We don't have that at Division Three, obviously, but we now have situations where, hey, I recruited 7 freshmen to replace 7 seniors. Now I've got 7 freshmen coming in and 7 seniors coming back. So good problems, bad problems to have. But do you have any insight on that decision to allow a fifth year of eligibility to those spring seniors who only played 6, 7 games possibly, and then their season was ended?
Yeah, I think personally, I'm happy that those things have come down the pike, because really all along my thought was I really wanted our schools and our coaches and student athletes to have as much flexibility as possible. And we've seen that through a lot of the things that we're now allowed to do. But, just like you talk about things that the public may not be aware of, well, my position's a lot different than somebody who's responsible for bringing in 20 basketball players or 30 soccer players. There's kind of that, planned obsolescence that, after 4 years, somebody's going to move on. And, it's a challenge. What do I do when these people come back? What I think really makes it different for um, Division 2 and Division 3 is, obviously, Division 3 you're not dealing with the athletic scholarships, which you do have to a smaller extent at Division 2. So it may be easier for a Division 1 to go around that, because they may have 85 football scholarships that they don't use all of them. So maybe there's a way that that can work. But in the Division 3 world, there's a lot of student athletes that even though they may want to come back, even though it may give them an opportunity to start work on a master's degree, when they start taking a fifth year of class, in many cases they got to pay for it. There's going to be financial aid, obviously, um, but there's no telling how much financial aid somebody is going to get. So that's really the biggest problem. It's great to give people flexibility so they can make a decision, but to be perfectly honest, if parents have to write a fairly significant check, and their kid has already completed their bachelor's degree, they may not be in a position to make a fifth year happen. So that really is the issue. But I really was hopeful all along that there would be as much flexibility as possible. And we've got that in a lot of different ways, but not just with the financial burden for a student and their family, but just in terms of facilitating competition. There's a lot of different things that institutions are going to have to deal with that probably aren't readily apparent to somebody who's on the outside. And certainly, if you're somebody who's looking to come in this year as a first year student, you may find that people that you never expected to play, they're still around. So what does that mean for me?
Sure.
Getting playing time as a first year. So a lot of different concerns still exist. I'm glad we have the flexibility, but it in no way makes it a really easy process for everybody to navigate.
No. Some of those discussions also went on this summer between the athletic directors, the president's council, the commissioner's office, obviously, with the social distancing. If we were to compete collegially, how would we have locker rooms? Would teams be able to dress at the other school? Would they have to dress in uniform, jump on a bus, and travel? Athletic training rooms, would both schools be able to use the one athletic training room? Would there be different sites and tents set up? What can you speak to in terms of some of those discussions that went on? And just, again, those are things that I'm not always sure parents and student athletes think of when they hear that we're canceling sports. These are the challenges that we're presented with.
Absolutely, and I can tell you all those things were really discussed at length. Our athletic trainers group really did an outstanding job trying to develop some protocols and some issues that everybody would have to encounter. One of the things that came up early on is, we're trying to social distance, but now all of a sudden you're going to have 30 soccer players or 100 football players trying to crowd into a locker room. Is that really a healthy situation? On the other side of the coin, you're going to have people that say, well, if somebody's going to, play a game and be in close contact with others for a couple of hours, you've got to give them access to showers, and you've got to give them access to different sorts of therapies and modalities. Well, the challenge is, are you actually creating more of a difficult environment by allowing people who you've social distanced on the field as much as possible, but now you're having them all go inside somewhere? So that really was a huge challenge. The other thing that is still a challenge as we look to the spring that a lot of people I think really miss out on is when you start looking at the number of teams that are typically in season at any one point in time, and the number of student athletes that are in season, and they're practicing every day, and they're having various treatments all day. There's only so much support staff to go around. So if you've got 2 or 3 athletic trainers that are responsible for a football team, but now because of social distancing, you could only bring one person in for treatment at a time, what time do you have to start treating those people to get everybody into a situation where they can receive treatments and get taped and all those sorts of things? Something that impacts someone such as yourself that a lot of people don't realize is, if you're not going to have fans in attendance, you want to make sure that you're continuing to do all the things that you can to allow people to watch games and consume the product over the internet. And it normally is a challenge if you've got maybe one full-time person and 2 graduate assistants to maybe staff 3, 4, 5 games at a time. But now you're looking at, okay, we could potentially have 10 different teams that are all playing at the same time. So in trying to find a way that makes it bearable for your staff, the last thing you need to have happen is a situation where now a staff member goes down, and now there's nobody that can provide athletic training help or PR coverage or things like that. And a lot of folks, they certainly see the games, they print out the schedules, but there's something going on virtually every day of the week, and it adds up. So a lot of those different considerations are things that we've talked about. Now that we're looking at what are we going to do with schedules, certainly you historically try to play as many events as you can on weekends so that you're not interfering with people's academic commitments. But if luck of the draw would have Nichols at home on a Saturday hosting lacrosse, football, soccer, and field hockey, something's got to give. You can't do all those things on a Saturday. So we're having to try to get creative. And while it may mean that some people are seeing schedules and plans that are a little different than what they're used to, our athletic directors and our office have to try to find a way to navigate all these things to make it as bearable as possible in a way that doesn't impact or reduce the student athlete experience.
Sure, and you jumped ahead a little bit to the spring challenges that we face, and that's something that we'll be looking for, hopefully, for everyone, is that we will have all these sports competing in the spring, and there definitely will be challenges. One of them you mentioned with webcasting is a lot of schools may have one, maybe two cameras and sets of equipment, and if you have four events, how do you choose which people whose parents get to watch and whose parents just get to watch some highlights that may be caught on an iPhone? So there's a lot of challenges there for sure to be figured out for the springtime. Getting back to where we were heading into the fall, we talked about some of the challenges with locker rooms and social distancing and spacing. Nichols has now rolled out their plan for the fall, like a lot of other colleges, and there will be testing done for students, ideally twice a week. And we'll know if anyone has contracted COVID and had to quarantine them and remove them from the population. How did that play into athletics in terms of, was there any talk given to, we're going to test the athletes more? How are we going to be able to, if we do have competition, test them regularly, keep them apart from each other in quarantine? Can you speak to those discussions at all?
Yeah, that was really a major part of the conversation. Really the two areas right off the bat that really evoked the most questions were access to tests and also the cost of the test. Like we're seeing now with Major League Baseball, um, if somebody is in a position where they've contracted COVID, uh, that may not show up for a couple of days. So just because you're getting a negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that that person is free and clear. If it's taking 5 days to get a result back, and you have an incubation period in there, even if we're testing people every day, if you're not getting those results back quickly, um, a lot of people might argue, why are you even doing testing in the first place? There are some conferences that early on, when the Hope was playing, they had made plans to rely more on screening than testing. We had a lot of folks at the presidential level with the advice of their medical directors and whatnot, who were fairly adamant that testing needed to be a pretty significant part of the process. But if it's taking a while to get those done, uh, that's a challenge. Um, when we looked at some numbers, the cost, you're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars uh, to just test a team multiple times a week. And if you're an institution and you've got a lot of other items that you're trying to deal with, um, is that something that you're able to do, especially if tuition is down, other revenues might be down? How do you balance all of those things? There are some programs out there that have seen the costs come down, that have seen the periods waiting for results to come down. But just like we're seeing in Major League Baseball, we're not over the hump where that is totally practical. By the time we get to the spring, there's hope that between a vaccine, improved testing, improved turnaround, that maybe we're in a better position to make all of those things happen. So that really was a large part of the conversation, and we also have to remember too, when that came into the conversation, um, you know, none of us are medical doctors that are having these conversations. We're certainly looping in the medical community, but we're talking about things that we're learning as we go. And a lot of times, the things that we're talking about, medical science as a whole may not have crossed a lot of those bridges. So the conversations, I think every time we felt good about something, there was something else that came out. Whether it was you need to do more testing, you need to do less testing. Here's an option that is a lot cheaper, but you may run the risk of having more false positives and false negatives and things like that. So a lot of different parts really went into it, but up until the time we made the decision, really the whole testing element was really significant, and it's certainly going to be significant when we look at ramping things up in the spring. The beauty of the spring is that schools will have had an opportunity uh, to put their institutional protocols in place, see where their shortcomings might be, and collectively, if everybody's in a better place and in a better way of administering all these things, that makes us better collectively. So that's another good thing about waiting for the spring to come upon us.
Sure, and a growing topic with the NCAA, and this has really just come up in the last 2 to 3 weeks. You've seen it with Major League Baseball. You've now seen it with the NFL. Is players opting out of the season, and we've seen a few students at Division I level, especially in the football side, decide they're going to opt out. What sorts of things may we see from the NCAA in terms of, hey, if a student athlete opts out, do they maintain that eligibility? Because we saw it granted for the spring season. What does that
Right.
look like for a student athlete who may say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable playing? Do they maintain that year, or is that their redshirt year, or has there been any discussions about that yet?
Yeah, there's discussions that are going on continually, with the management council and the president's council. My gut tells me that if we've approved waivers for those spring student athletes, you've got to give fall student athletes the same opportunity to do that. One thing that the NCAA and the committee structure have really been good about since the beginning is telling institutions and telling student athletes, you need to do what you have to do. Your safety and your well-being and your academic concerns really trump everything else. So, for those who may not be aware, student athletes who played a handful of games in the spring, they did not lose a season of competition. They get that semester back. In Division III, there's no red shirts per se. So you basically got 10 semesters or 15 quarters to get your 4 seasons of eligibility in. Those student athletes who were impacted by the loss of their spring season, they get back the the semester as well as the season. My hope would be that we would also see that in the spring season as well. So, if somebody is in a position where they say, you know what, I'm not feeling safe as far as playing, I want to continue going to class, I'd find it really hard to believe that those people are going to not be able to get back that time, that semester or that season. Certainly it's not been signed off on yet, but I would certainly have a real hard time believing that they wouldn't get the same opportunities as a roommate that maybe was competing in the spring. So, fingers crossed. I think you're going to, see a lot of people throughout the membership from conferences and schools throughout Division III that are advocating for that. And again, just giving people as much flexibility to do what they need to do and hopefully make decisions, based on the situation that is right for them.
Sure.
So I feel good about it moving forward, but we still got to wait for some committees to sign off on those things.
So we have these fall sports, which are planned right now to be played in the springtime. The start of the winter sports season has been postponed as well until January 1st. One of the sports that the CCC has really helped grow is Division III hockey. We've had a lot of top 15 teams, UNE, Salve, Endicott, Nichols. with those teams, you do have some foreign students. You have some student athletes from Canada. We have some student athletes from Sweden and over in Europe. Has there been anything brought to the conference or discussions with the AD's presence about those student athletes who they may lose, who may have some trouble getting back in, and that they may have to replace it in a sense, that their positions, they're just not able to get back into the country and play for these teams?
Yeah, it's really going to be a challenge. If you look at hockey in specific, you can't cross the border right now. So if folks are at home, they're not going to be able to make it down. And at some point, the decision's going to have to be made. What do we do with these folks? Do we try to get replacements? Does it maybe give some other student athletes an opportunity to play a little bit more? With that issue with the border being closed specifically, it certainly it's something that's at a level much bigger than the institutions or the conference, but certainly, for coaches who were originally looking at getting their teams on the ice in early to mid-October, which obviously it's not going to happen now. But they've really got to take a good hard look at what their numbers are and what do they do. It goes back to what we had said earlier. If now all of a sudden you try to find people who are somewhat local, who can help fill out a roster, what do you do if all of a sudden those international students are now able to play? So it's really a challenging dilemma, and it's another one of these things that I think goes into the category of none of us really know what's going to happen. It's a day by day situation, and hopefully it finds a way to resolve itself. But I think right now everybody pretty much has to hold on, see what the landscape is, see if things are going to change, and then do your best to react to it. With what would be really interesting in a situation, using hockey as an example, if you're counting on having, 30 players and you're going to dress 18 of them on a given night as skaters. But now you're looking at maybe having to play 3 conference games a week instead of 2 conference games a week. What does that do for the health and safety? Everybody wants to play, but you certainly reach a point where is it too much?
Sure.
Are you doing somebody more harm than not by putting them in a situation where they've got to overexert themselves, or what do you do when those people get injured and things like that? So no real answers, but certainly a huge challenge for our administrators and our coaches.
Sure, and again, another challenge with hockey will be teams that play at public rinks. Again, Nichols is one that plays at a very nice rink in Burrillville High School, but it's also shared by several other teams. So sanitizing, social distancing will always come into effect there. I'm sure something that some of our fans are curious about, with the spring scheduling, having all of these sports now in the spring, while things are still to be determined, is there the thought of we're going to plan to have men's and women's lacrosse traditionally in the March, April months, and we will schedule football, soccer's around them January, February, while that might be curled outside? Or may there be some shuffling around? What have you heard? What are the discussions?
I would say at this point we've pretty much left a lot of things on the table. Certainly there are some sports. It certainly would be easier to play baseball or play lacrosse a little bit earlier in the spring. Late February. It's not unusual to see games being played,
Especially at the
at that.
Division I level.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to do it in a sport like baseball and softball. It just won't happen. One of the ideas, just to give you an example of some of the things that we've been talking about, is in trying to be mindful of the stress that it puts on facilities and staff, as we had talked about earlier. I came up with an idea where if you're playing soccer on days or on the same days as lacrosse, you can have lacrosse played at one institution, and then the same two teams could play each other at the other site, so that you've at least spread that out a little bit. Sports like men's and women's tennis, which you can play inside. Ideally, you'd like to play outside if possible. But that's a situation because we normally play our women's season in the fall and our men's season in the spring. That naturally becomes a doubleheader where maybe you have both teams playing doubles at the same time. You're trying to have men's and women's matches happening, individual matches happening at the same time as well. When you look at squeezing in other sports like volleyball and field hockey, because your facilities have a lot of crossover, if, let's say, for argument's sake, soccer is being played on a Wednesday and a Saturday, and lacrosse is being played on a Wednesday and a Saturday, maybe volleyball becomes something that you're now having to play on a Thursday and a Sunday, so that you're spreading it out a little bit more. Football is another one that it can be very taxing on the administrative and the support staff. So, there is the possibility that, you might entertain more games being played on a Friday night or on a Thursday night, as we've seen more throughout college athletics. I think the other part that's going to be a really interesting conversation to have is that going in to that fall season being played in the spring season, we already know that a waiver that's available is for student athletes and teams that don't play half of a normal schedule. They won't lose a season of competition. So that's another part of the conversation. Do we want to preserve that for student athletes? So if normally a soccer team is able to play 20 games and maybe that number has been reduced in half, maybe you have a situation where you only play the conference schedule so that you can have a champion, you can have a conference tournament, but you're not costing anybody eligibility. That's an interesting one. On the football side, the same thing is in effect if you're playing 5 games or fewer. But the issue there, and we had alluded to this a little bit earlier, if now you're playing a season of anywhere from 5 to 8 or 10 games in the spring, and then you're bringing everybody back in the fall to have a full preseason and then play 10 games plus the NCAA tournament, if a team were to go all the way and play 15 games in the fall, that's a lot of football games that they're playing from February or March until November. So there's a lot of different ideas. There's a lot of models that we've talked about, but we're still trying to work through all of those things.
Sure. And as we know, things are changing on a day-to-day basis. What you guys determined this week may not work in 2 weeks from now. One of the exciting things with the conference this year, the addition of women's ice hockey. We've had a number of schools in the conference support women's hockey in different conferences. What brought them all together in the CCC at this point in time?
Absolutely. And I'll start by saying that I'm as excited about women's ice hockey joining the CCC as anything that we've had. Really, what it came down to, very, very similar to what we experienced on the men's side a couple of years ago. We had several schools from outside the CCC that had been competing in a single sport league. And through attrition on both the men's side and the women's side, those programs wound up going to other conferences. The New England Hockey Conference being a single sport league for teams whose multi-sport conferences don't have enough. So by schools making the decision to maybe go in other directions, when you're left with just teams from your multi-sport conference, it certainly makes things a little bit easier. I think the biggest challenge on the women's side was that our core for the longest time was 5 schools. And, those 5 were competing in the Colonial Hockey Conference, which did an outstanding job. They were able to eventually secure an AQ, an automatic qualification spot once their membership numbers reached a certain point for a certain amount of time. We didn't want to lose that. And seeing other CCC schools, in addition to those 5, make the decision to start playing women's ice hockey, that made it a situation where we were able to secure the automatic bid without having to go back to the beginning of a waiting period, which is what happens when you're below 7. So really, the announcements that Western New England would be coming on board this year, the announcement that Curry would be coming on board with a varsity program next year, it really made it a no-brainer. Everybody who was competing in that league was a CCC member or an associate member on the men's side. So it really seemed like everything just aligned where now the timing was actually right to do it. And I'm hoping as much as anybody that all the conversations that we've had, some ideas that are percolating as far as how we can make that inaugural season a special experience. I would really hate to have to delay any of those things for any length of time. So hopefully everybody, keeps wearing their masks and keeps distancing and doing all the things that we can, because that inaugural season on the women's side is really going to be a big celebration. It fills a big void in our sports sponsorship over the last couple of years, and it would be nice to be able to get that launched at the time we've been planning to get it all started.
Sure, and again, you mentioned hopefully not delaying the start of the women's hockey season. Another new member to the conference this year is Suffolk. Had like to get them playing as soon as possible. Talk about Suffolk joining the CCC.
Yeah, that's just a wonderful, wonderful addition. We had spent several years talking about expansion at the AD level and the presidential level. First trying to decide if it's something that we would like to do. Is it something that we felt the time was right to do that? But most importantly, it's got to be an institution that is a good fit. So you're trying to find somebody certainly who is competitive, who runs a really nice athletic department, but you also want to make sure that the philosophy of the school, the quality of the academics, the geography, and all of those things are a good fit. We're really fortunate to have a fairly small footprint as far as athletic conferences go. The biggest trip from one end to the other is about 3 hours. Other parts of the country, they would love to have a short trip that was maybe even twice that distance. So that's one good thing in New England, is that we're really, we're not all that spread out. But you want somebody that's going to be within the footprint. You want somebody who's going to put the same emphasis on the academic side, on an institution that's going to be stable financially, recruiting the same types of student athletes, the same quality of student. And Suffolk really seemed to present. It seemed like it was a tremendous match. Having to wait after you announce that they're joining, that's it's always a challenge. Think about the Seattle Kraken, people having to wait for 2 years for that to finally get a name, and then another year or so before you begin playing. So it's great when all the excitement builds up to something that you've been really anticipating for the longest time. But now, we're faced with, when are they actually going to be able to start playing? And, hopefully it's as close to as we're planning on right now. But Suffolk's going to be a great addition, help us out tremendously on the women's side. Another up and coming program on the men's side for hockey. And they're a tremendous athletic program all the way across the board. So great addition, and hopefully we can get them out there on the field with everybody sooner rather than later.
I love that you worked the Seattle Kraken because their logo and all their marks and uniforms was just spot on with everything they did with that announcement. They did such a good job. And again, transitioning back to the CCC, went through a rebranding last year with the
That's it.
logos. And so in my time with the CCC, we had 14 teams at one point, 14 institutions. We went down to 10, to 9. And now we've brought not just a 10 team back in, but we now have everyone under the same umbrella. We had football over here, men's hockey here, and then a lot of the Olympic sports together. Now everything is under that CCC umbrella. So just talk about the excitement that you've seen and the growth of the conference really within the last 5, 6 years to bring everyone together.
When you look at New England as a whole, there's 8 division conferences. Um, if you look at all the leagues that are comprised entirely of private institutions, other than the NESCAC, we're the only one that offers football, men's ice hockey, women's ice hockey. Um, Institutions pretty much have one-stop shopping, which means you're paying dues to one conference instead of several conferences. You have the ability to say, well, we like the way this works in men's hockey. We could make it work for the women and vice versa. Um, when you look at certain things, such as the structure of all tournament teams or all conference teams and things of that nature, every student athlete has the same path to get that same sort of recognition. I think that's absolutely a tremendous thing. We're at a point now where so many of our institutions sponsor a vast majority of our sports, and that's really nice. It allows us to really make sure that the experience that we're giving student athletes, regardless of the sport they're playing, are the same. Certainly in some sports, the sponsorship numbers aren't there yet. Um, you don't see a lot of institutions cutting programs in the face of the pandemic. In fact, there's a lot who have added programs because it gives more opportunity for student athletes to do what they want. So hopefully we get to a point down the road, where we can enhance what we've done even more and start looking at sports like men's volleyball, or if we're in a position where sports like rugby are played at the varsity level as opposed to the club level.
Esports.
It's nice to know that everybody can get what they need at home without having to go elsewhere. So it's a good thing. I'm excited. I know when I started with the conference back in 2007, there were plenty of people that said, well, you'll never have football to deal with, or you'll never have hockey to deal with. Now they're here, and I think that's a great thing when you can recognize your all sports champion. It really is reflective of the entire program and not just a subset of the program. So we're in a great place with good membership, tremendous athletic directors, presidents that really understand the role that intercollegiate athletics plays for their institutions and also collectively. So we're in a good place. There's still some places where we can grow a little bit, and hopefully when things return to normal, we'll be able to pick up where we left off and introduce some more new things to the mix.
And as we wind things down with CCC Commissioner Gregg Kaye, Gregg, the competition in the conference has really been elevated the last couple of years. And you've seen some teams, and I'll point out Nichols in particular, making a run to the Elite Eight in men's basketball a couple of years ago. You've had a hockey team in the national championship game, lost in double overtime. We pretty put 2 or 3 teams in that. Whereas at one time the CCC may have been kind of a one and done with our conference champions, we've really seen that change now in the last couple of years.
We really have, and it certainly does wonders to enhance the reputation, not just within the region, but nationally. When I started in 2007, it was kind of a rite of passage. Who's going to win our AQ? You send them off, and every once in a while you'll pick up a win somewhere, but you're happy to be crowning a champion. Then we reached a point when, we started winning some games, and I think that was was when you really started to see the potential that a lot of our programs have had. We've had some great years when we've had not just one but multiple at-large bids in sports like men's soccer several years ago. And it really is really it's really nice to be in that stage. When Nichols went on to the Elite Eight, one of the toughest things being in the conference office in normal times is that you have nobody to cheer for. So to be able to be at that basketball game several years back at Amherst, and be able to root for somebody, and wish them well afterwards. That's what it's all about. There's never been any doubt that student athletes and coaches are talented and they work hard, but you like to see that hard work and effort get rewarded. So now when we have years where we don't have an at-large team, or we don't have somebody get out of the second round, it's disappointing. And certainly not disappointed in your student athletes, but what the expectations are, and we've had a taste of having some teams on the national stage. So hopefully that's something that we're able to keep rolling. We've got great coaches. We've really reduced the number of part-time head coaches in the league significantly over the last decade and a half, and that really pays benefits when you have the right people and you're able to retain the right people. And certainly it's a tremendous amount of fun seeing your teams go on and succeed, and take to a court or skate on a rink where, hey, they're one game away from winning it all, or one game away from going to the Final Four. That's what we do this for, and it certainly is a lot of fun when teams have that success.
And you mentioned the game at Amherst a couple of years ago, Gregg, for the Nichols men's basketball team, and I'll leave you with this question. What's your favorite Nichols memory? And they've had some great ones, lots of tennis championships. The men's soccer's won a couple of championships. Men's basketball success, obviously. What are your favorite memories?
I really think one of my favorite memories was when Marcos Echeverria set the conference scoring record. I thought that was just phenomenal. Doug Chan, our associate commissioner, and I, we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to research the history and build up our records. And, when you see records that are in place, for a quarter of a century, you kind of wonder, wow, what did that person have to do to make that happen? And Marcos was somebody from an early stage, just seeing his ability and his results. Early on, I'm like, this is somebody that may have a shot at that record. And sure enough, he chipped away and he chipped away and he chipped away. And that was a lot of fun. You get to know people over the years. And while we in the conference office certainly don't have the same type of regular access that somebody like yourself might have, when you meet those really special people and you get to see them succeed, that's just tremendous. And last year when he got passed, not only seeing somebody else enjoy that same experience, but the way that he handled all of that was absolutely tremendous. So that is that was a really special memory for me. That again, we don't have the ability to root for teams and people per se, but you like seeing everybody reach their potential, and that's a young man that I just enjoyed watching every day for 4 years, and see him put that cherry on top of the sundae. That was really, really cool.
Marcos, of course, really the quintessential student athlete. He had an over 3.5 GPA. He was an academic All-American, and he was a candidate for the Jostens Award as a senior. And Eric Demers, the same thing this past year. He made, I believe, Sports Illustrated had a nice feature on him. Some really quality student athletes coming out of the CCC, which is what we want. Greg, do you have any final thoughts parting on what we've talked about, particularly with the fall sports and going to the spring and just things that we can look for in the next couple weeks and months coming from the conference office and whatever you'd like to share with us?
Absolutely. One of the goals that the athletic directors and myself have shared with our presidents is that what we really want to do is in light of being so incredibly disheartened by not being able to play games again this fall. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to enhance the efforts of our institutions in creating alternatives that still help provide a meaningful experience for our student athletes. So we're talking right now about doing a lot of different programming, having some fun with some things on social media, and really dusting off a lot of ideas that we've had over the years that we haven't been able to put into play. So, you know, I'm so hopeful. Or start again. I'm so I'm so optimistic that the folks at our institutions and in our staff are going to be able to do some things that really makes this a special semester. And the celebration is going to be after we do all of those programs, we still get to see everybody compete again. And that's really the big thing. So everybody keep focused on our social media outlets. Keep searching for us on Twitter and Facebook, and keep visiting our website because we've got a lot of really good ideas that I think are really going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a challenging semester once again, but I think we're going to come through doing some great things that are also going to lay the groundwork for doing some great things well down the road. So it's a pivotal time for us. It's a challenging time, but like everybody says, that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And we're certainly going to be much stronger and much better for it once we get through all of this. And we're looking forward to seeing everybody out there in the spring.
Greg, let's plug those social media accounts for the conference. Where can they find you guys?
If you go to Twitter and you look for CCC Athletics, that's where you want to go. If you go on Facebook, type in Commonwealth Coast Conference, you'll see us there. CCC Athletics on Instagram as well. We try to do a lot of fun things, and we're really going to try to pull out all the stops this year.
Great. Greg, Kaye, thank you so much for joining us on Have You Heard. Hope the move to Maine went well, and we'll see you back at campus and on the fields real soon.
Pete, thanks so much again. A pleasure.